Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And it's Laura at home.
Oh, Laura, it's how many years since we did an Electioncast?
Not that many. Actually, it's nearly 5. That's not true. So yeah, not nearly,
Four and a half.
Yes.
And also to help us out, we're joined from Westminster by our friend, political correspondent Alex Forsyth. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
And also there with Alex is economics editor for the BBC, Faisal Islam. Hi, Faisal.
Hi. Am I not your friend?
I got the title. Who didn't? I quite like it.
Oh, sorry. Okay, we're off to a bad start already. We're all friends here. It's just you don't want to overuse that word.
No.
Do you?
Okay. Fine.
Anyway,
That's so harsh.
Let's not fall out. We've got 43 days to go. Oh,
He's just very picky, Faisal, about his friends.
This is the behind the scenes you didn't want to know. Anyway, right.
Nice at this point.
Do you know what I was actually going to do? I was actually going to big up Faisal and say, well, there's a huge, big economic backstory to why we're even discussing the election today, which he's going to dig into. So
you're not going to do that anymore, are you?
Well, no, I'll have to now. Laura, okay. Watching today unfold, just give me your big thoughts. Were you surprised? Because actually, I'm not sure how much money was on today being the day.
Well, in the big picture, I'm not that surprised because remember a few weeks ago, we talked a lot about whether or not there was a plan afoot to go for a summer election after all the will they, won't they, will they, won't they, will they, won't they. However, from sort of early this morning and somebody I trust said to me, yes, it is actually going to be today. And I thought, oh, so when you hear that, you go, what? So you can talk about it in the abstract, but when you actually hear it, you think, wow, here we are. Is it a surprise? It always feels like a huge moment. The biggest sense of it on the page, going into an election campaign when you're 20 points behind seems absolutely crackers. However, the case for a summer election has been won by Oliver Dowden, as I understand it, the Deputy Prime Minister and sort of right-hand man of the PM. As Chief of Staff, Liam Booth-Smith is also thought to have been in favour, although there have been other powerful voices against. And if you just make a very quick list, case for a summer election, the economic numbers look better, although people don't necessarily feel better. The Rwanda law has been passed, but hasn't yet been tested. Autumn and winter campaigns are grim. Summer, you might, more of that later, get the sun shining. It's a big football tournament. People might be a bit happier. But also, crucially, more and more Tory MPs have been standing down. And I think the Tory party has become harder and harder and harder to govern. So I think that is a big factor in this too.
And it's interesting because Rishi Sunak has been saying for some time, my working assumption is the general election will be in the second half of this year. The 4th of July is just in the second half of this year. So he's consistent with what he said, just.
He is. Although I have to say, as I said at the weekend, there's going to be a lot about this in different parts of the country. It's the school holidays in Scotland and in Northern Ireland as well. And I think, if you're a Scottish Conservative, you'd be thinking, thanks very much, boss, because I think that is a factor, right?
Oh, what? Because people might be away from home, so we'll have to make sure they've got a postal vote. Yeah. I mean, the schools in Scotland will be free to be polling stations, though.
Yeah, but then people will have to be paid to go and open them up.
Oh yeah, good point. Faisal, can you interpret the economic numbers we got today? I mean, the main one being the latest inflation figures.
Inflation did fall sharply. That's not a surprise. And it's fallen crucially close to the Bank of England's target of 2%, just above 2.3%. So you can see why he wanted to use it to deploy that number as part of a general argument of normalisation, stabilisation in the economy. When you look at also the economy number that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, showing the end of the recession at the end of last year, actually pretty stronger growth than we'd expected. However, under the cover of that number, underlying that number, it wasn't so great, actually, because the measures of services inflation, which is what the kind of Bank of England, for example, looks at when they're setting interest rates, they remained stubbornly high. They fell a tiny bit to 5.9%. And that means that if you had the GDP numbers going the way of the government, if you like, end of recession, you had inflation coming down towards target. If the third leg of this sort of economic trident to take to the electorate was interest rate cuts ahead of an election, that is now looking less likely in June than it was this morning because that inflation is looking sticky. But I think the bigger point is to peg your fate or the announcement of a general election to an ONS announcement. I'm left thinking, if it had shocked us and come in at 3%, which would have been like, whoa, shock, that's really quite high, would they not have done what they've done today? Was it entirely contingent on the inflation number? But you have this. I did an interview with the PM in March, and I came out of that thinking, God, he's very upbeat about the economy. And I thought, is May somehow back on again? But no, the timetable had lapsed out. But I did note and was pointed to this run of data that emerged, and we talked about it on Newscast. So, but I have to say, what does it say? It provides the argument that he'll put to the nation. We heard that in the wet of Downing Street today, did we not? That, the economy is turning around. You have that contour, and then kind of the sort of fundamental axis of this election between Labour and the Conservatives will be, do they get benefit for a turnaround after 3 massive price shocks which were global in nature? Or, the Labour argument, do they get some of the blame for the extent of those price shocks in the UK? And as Laura just said, do people actually feel, even if the numbers are starting to turn, do people feel that? Indeed, someone very senior in Number 10 said to me, it was quite interesting that when you look at the vox pops that occasionally are used on the TV news, people say that they don't feel it. But there is a way in which economists calculate this. It's called the consumer confidence numbers, and they've turned up. And I thought, I haven't noticed them turning up. And I went back and had a look, and I found literally one sub-index of the consumer confidence numbers, which was about your confidence in the next 12 months, that had just marginally gone positive. So that is the sort of data point that has given Number 10 some confidence that they can grab onto and sell a story to the public.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, it's also, I think what you just said there, Faisal, is absolutely key. It's selling a story, because at least now they can argue they've got a narrative to take into an election campaign around the economy, whereas had the numbers gone in a different way, even shaping the narrative, whether or not people bought into that story or thought it was a total fairy tale is quite another subject and up to the people themselves. But I think that's an important part of this, because I think if the numbers weren't where they were, and as Laura said, I think there have been various calculations thrown into the mixing pot when they came out with when they were actually going to go. But the economy being absolutely crucial. If the numbers weren't where they were, then what would be the narrative of the Conservatives going to this election campaign? And you heard it from, Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor, who's on the radio this morning. You heard it from Rishi Sunak in the sodden suit steps of Downing Street in the rain, making his thing. It's going to be the key narrative, right, that they're going to take into the campaign. And I think, that difference between how people feel and what the government says is absolutely crucial. But at least the government's got something to say from its perspective.
And talking about data points, it was so interesting. Yesterday, I got an email from my energy company saying your direct debit's going to go down on Friday because the energy price cap is coming down. Of course, the energy price cap is set by Ofgem, the energy regulators. It's not a fact of nature. It's a calculation made by a regulator, which is an arm of the state. But it sort of feels a bit like, a bit of a tax cut almost. So you realise that there's a feel-good factor from that. Laura, can we...
Sorry, I was just going to say one more point on this. I think fundamentally what they have been doing in the last few months is a very basic, is it better or worse to wait? And they had been in a place of thinking, if you wait, something might get better, it might turn up, people will feel more flush. Yes, the data is looking better, but we know that people aren't feeling it yet. And also things might actually they might even be worse in other ways. So look at the borrowing numbers that came today. Public borrowing hit a 3-year high today. The cost of the infected blood compensation is absolutely enormous. There was not going to be a little big giant chunk of change to spray around in an autumn pre-election budget giveaway. That was not going to happen. So why wait, right? So if you're not going to get that potential, that huge bit of boost that you would want in the autumn, then why wait? And that has changed the calculation too. The other thing that I've just heard today, and it might not happen, but I heard something quite wild, is that there might even be, in the last couple of frantic days of Parliament, a finance bill that would give another tax cut before Parliament is dissolved. Now, I've got no idea if that is true or not, but it has done the rounds today. That would be a pretty sketchy thing, because they'd be daring Labour to vote against a tax cut just as they go into an election campaign.
And also, they'd be doing a tax cut without calculations from the Office of Budget Responsibility to say whether the numbers added up. And remember what happened last time that happened. We will hear from Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, in a second, because he did a statement as well, although he chose to do it inside. So it was maybe a bit less atmospheric and looked a bit less dramatic, but he was definitely drier. Laura, what's your take on the political operatives call it the optics. We call it how it looked. What did you think about just how it looked? You're on a podcast, remember?
Okay. So why do politicians who live in Number 10 want to use that backdrop? Because it makes them look like they've got authority, It makes them look dignified. It makes them look like they have power, right? The full trappings of power. And there's normally a real dignity in using that lectern and using that political pulpit, if you like. Today, he looked more and more and more and more soaked. I mean, there was practically water pouring down his face. Couldn't hear for a lot of the statement because of the music that was being blasted out on Whitehall, which wasn't any old tune. It was the new Labour anthem of things can only get better. And can I be not the first to say, but the first to say on Newscast, things can only get wetter, as being the gag du jour. I mean, I think it looked dreadful. And a lot of people would have watched it and thought, oh my God, I can't almost believe this is real. And imagine what it would have been like once he went through the door. However, might some people have felt a bit sorry for him? Possibly. But I'm pretty surprised that they let him do it in that rain, because in these kinds of statements, often people are waiting, they look at the forecast. They had the option to do it inside. And at one point, it seemed as if they were going to, and they sent him out there. And, he looked like he was, metaphorically drowning, being drowned out by the music and drowning in the rain.
And also, remember when Liz Truss was anointed as Prime Minister, she actually drove around the block for about half an hour. And all the news reporters had to just commentate on pictures of from the helicopter, going, "Oh, she's driving past this building. Oh, that's where I go and cash my checks. Oh, that's where I go to the bottle bank." Alex, what's interesting for us though as political journalists is when you go to a prime ministerial media event, it is very tightly controlled. There are lots of people with clipboards and there's ropes, and then there's people tug your arm if you've been speaking to the Prime Minister and asking him questions for 10 seconds too long.
What are you contrasting that with the Downing Street moment today, which was just a slightly strange melee? I think, I just think in terms of the choreography of the day, it was entirely fascinating to me, because I'm happy to admit that I genuinely was surprised by it coming today as it did, because although there had been, as Laura rightly said, speculation about the prospect of a summer election, I think it still felt on the day today like it was a bit of a surprise. And this morning I was in Downing Street for an entirely different reason, when it was actually still raining. And actually I found out I've got a hole in my left boot and I've still got a wet sock as we speak. But it was like there were people actually in Downing Street that were taken by surprise by the level of speculation that had suddenly fired up, I think. And then it was kind of allowed to fester through the day in this slightly strange way where, people in Westminster got themselves into a frenzy, and lots of people on social media speculating about X, Y and Z. And then it kind of all built up to this sense of inevitability that this was going to happen at some point today. And then the date dropped before the Prime Minister officially announced it and all the rest of it. But even that choreography felt, kind of like it wasn't entirely controlled in the way that we are used to some of these things being really controlled. And then you add to that, exactly as Laura described, the kind of sodden Prime Minister. I mean, you can't control the weather. I mean, let's be honest. You can't. Well, then, you can get an umbrella, I guess.
Well, you can send up one of those missiles, can't you? A cloud dispersal missile. That's what they'd have done.
Do they have them in Downing Street?
I don't. They should do.
They might invest in some.
They'd love to have that, wouldn't they? They would love to. Be a way of winning elections forevermore.
It's going to be sunny forever. Laura, I know you've got to go, but just quickly, are you picking up chatter and backlash from Conservative MPs? And the reason I asked that question is I've just seen, even just on X, formerly known as Twitter, 2 Conservative MPs who are standing down at this election, so they're out the game, Diana Davison and Tracy Crouch, saying basically explicitly, oh, we're sad because this has come too soon because we still wanted to get things done for our constituents for a bit longer. And if that is people saying that publicly, I imagine people are saying much worse privately.
Yeah, I think that some people are really, really unhappy. On that basic point is that going into a campaign when you're 20 points behind, unless you've got a majority of 1 million votes, you're really, really worried that you might lose your job. That's on the face of it. The other thing is I think that Rishi Sunak's team has never managed to get a decent operation of handling their MPs. They haven't. And they took over, as you and I talked about on Saturday, they took over a party that was already bruised, battered, full of grudges, full of vendettas, full of unhappy people. I think the on again, off again, on again, off again election speculation has made that worse, because whatever you think of MPs, this is also their livelihoods, their jobs, their careers. They care about their constituents. They care about their own careers. And I think there is a sense that for many months, actually, Downing Street has sort of allowed the speculation to sort of be up and then down, then up and then down. And it's just not been, it's just not been a good sequence of events. And I think I think the other thing is that the optics of tonight actually is the kind of thing that MPs look at. They think that people will have sort of thought that just looks dreadful, that even makes us look like they might pity him. And in politics, pity is such a terrible, terrible sentiment to allow to fester. And it's interesting tonight, just the last point I'll make, you've got a member of the Tory party, prominent, probably going to be a leadership candidate after the election if the Tories lose. Penny Mordaunt has put out her little manifesto for her area saying it's been decided as ever by local people and local priorities. So we've already got, just a couple of hours in, you've got prominent ministers and prominent figures basically saying, don't look at the brand, look at me. Don't look at the party, don't look at the prime minister, look at me. I do my own thing. And I think that's very, very telling. But, campaigns can change things. We were all there in 2017 and the world could look very different in 100 days' time.
Well, or 43 days' time.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant to say. God, it's not.
It's 100 days long. What?
43.
Election campaign inflation.
Imagine what we'll be calling each other by then.
We're all friends here, Faisal. Laura, I'm going to let you go. Lovely to catch up with you. See you soon.
Bye, everybody. Have fun.
Right, let's listen to Sir Keir Starmer, Labour leader, who was inside.
On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country.
And he also did a video on social media where he was actually even in the sunshine outside. So another contrast, although that social media video apparently did have a typo on one of their big election pledges. So maybe turned around quite quickly.
Maybe he pre-recorded that. Which makes
there wasn't much sunshine today.
Yeah.
So it must have been at least yesterday.
Well, it's interesting this. If you look back, Adam, at the sort of slightly bizarre press conferences and press interventions that we've had on both major parties, they have been playing a sort of shadow campaign, haven't they? That Hunt press conference.
Yeah.
But also, the Rachel Reeves sort of trying to preempt these two big economic figures that came out with a press conference where she sort of basically said, even if this shows a better economy, it doesn't really count.
Yeah.
And she did the same thing yesterday with an article in The Sun. And so you can see that they've been they definitely have been trying to preempt any notion that there's been a change in the economic weather.
I mean, the election was called today, but the campaign's already been underway for some time in my mind. Do you know what I mean? Not officially, but kind of unofficially, exactly as you say, Faisal. And one of the things that's really flagged it to me, not least the fact we've had these set-piece speeches, not just from the Chancellor and Shadow Chancellor, but from the Prime Minister and from Keir Starmer as well.
They haven't really announced anything.
Well, they've just been, broadly political, talking about their ambitions, their aims, basically, why they think they're the best for the country. But there's also this other sort of aside, which is that my inbox is increasingly full of briefings from various parties about why whatever the other party's saying isn't right. Do you know what I mean? The kind of counter-attack before the attack is just ramped up to the point you're like...
Pre-buttal?
Yeah, pre-buttal.
Is that it?
Excellent. That's exactly what it is. Pre-buttal, not just rebuttal.
That was the real thing that made me think this week, this election is coming sooner than lots of people think, or the received wisdom is because the Conservative campaign headquarters was sending out emails to journalists every morning with minute rebuttals and footnotes on what quite junior Labour people had been saying on breakfast programmes that morning. And you're like, okay, this is not business as usual. This is what you do in an election campaign. Faisal, just on Keir Starmer's pitch, I mean, Rishi Sunak's criticism of Labour is that they don't have a plan. It's back to square one. When you look at Labour's pledges on the economy, I mean, how much of a plan does Labour have for the economy, for example?
It's clear in January that they rode back on the biggest single defining difference, which was their Green Prosperity Plan, and to borrow and spend tens of billions of pounds more. And actually, that really tells you a lot about how they're going to fight this general election, I think, because I think the thinking there, they still believe in extra green investment. They see that as a dividing line with the Conservatives. They don't think anymore that you necessarily need to borrow that money or can borrow that money in order to fund it, and you can get it from the private sector instead with massive planning reform. So they've sort of shifted their view. But the biggest strategic point here is they think that what happened a couple of years back with Liz Truss and the mini budget has so seared into the subconscious of the British public, including in crucial areas that were highly sensitive to their mortgage payments. They think that kind of almost kind of, that kind of subconscious association now, fair or unfair, with mortgage rates having gone up substantially, with a trigger point in Liz Truss's mini budget. They just, if they were to reduce their election campaign down to one factor, I think it would be repeating Liz Truss's mini budget chaos as much as they can, or that phrase, Tory mortgage premium. And so what happened was they rode back on the extra borrowing because that was the clear rebuttal that Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt could say, well, hang on a minute, you're going to borrow tens of billions of pounds more money for this green investment stuff. You're going to raise borrowing rates for the government and therefore for mortgage holders. So they feel that they've cut that off as a counter argument. And I can predict that they are going to try and hammer that again and again and again. And it must have been manna from heaven for them when Liz Truss popped back up now just a few weeks before the calling of a general election to remind the public of her existence and what happened 2 years ago. So, let's see. But I'm willing to bet at least £1 that we're going to see images of Liz Truss in the Labour election broadcast.
That's a bet I'm not going to take, even though it's just £1. But it is fascinating because while we were talking earlier about how, the numbers are sort of at least giving the Conservatives a narrative they can attempt to shape around the economy, what is fascinating is that Labour are so prepared to take the fight to the Conservatives on the economy, because traditionally, Adam, as you know, that's never been considered Labour's comfortable territory. And yet they are now seemingly willing to, from their perspective, get on the front foot over the economy, which is why it's going to be such an interesting, I hate this phrase, I'm going to try not to use this over the course of the next 40 however many days, but battle line 43.
But then this is really interesting, isn't it? Because to the extent that they've moved on to that quote unquote centre ground territory to win Conservative voters, you then have the Green Party on the other side saying, well, hang on, these guys aren't serious about the green issues, they won't put the money in, they rode back on it already. You have some other issues on the left where you're going to see an interest, they're going to have to make some judgments now in the manifesto process as to precisely where they land on this balancing act. Who are they trying to target? Are they trying to target, and this is the really fascinating one for me, so much of politics has been about those 2019 Tory Labour switchers, post-Brexit, Boris Johnson sort of supporters, or at least comfortable with Boris Johnson's argument, and trying to win those back. Can Labour win all those voters or most of those voters back, keep its coalition in metropolitan Britain? Another thing I throw open, there's different arguments about this in terms of the timing. The student vote, they're not going to be in their universities on July the 4th. Is that part of the strategic thinking? Because I remember in June 2017, that did have a material impact, certainly in a dozen or a few dozen constituencies. Canterbury was the famous one, wasn't it? So we're not going to have that impact. But is it good or bad for the Conservatives that those students will be back at home or on holiday, or when's Glastonbury? I don't know. That is an interesting factor.
Faisal, dates that I know you will know is all the England matches in the Euros.
Yeah.
What do you think the football factor could be in this?
Well, I think firstly, there's an attention factor. Tens of millions of people in England and in Scotland, of course, will be watching a lot of football every day from pretty much the 14th of June. And if things go to plan, I think England will have won their round of 16 match on the Sunday before the general election. And someone told me they might be heading for a tie-up with Germany in the quarters. I have to double check that, but the quarter-final would then be on the Saturday after the general election. Whoever wins the general election, actually it is commonly perceived that England, although we say this all the time, have a decent chance. And so there's every chance that Euros fever will coincide with maybe not general election fever.
I was going to say, that's a brave comparison.
I don't know, but whoever wins, Do they welcome back Harry Kane, or I should say John McGinn of Scotland with the trophy to number 10 as Prime Minister? That is a prize. There's a prize.
Right, let's hear from some of the other teams in the British general election. Here is the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey. He was speaking in Surrey, and he's going to be making lots of visits to places in southern England, which they like to call the Blue Wall, because they're trying to snatch them from the Tories.
We're here in Surrey. Everyone knows the battle here is between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, but in so many other counties and across the home counties in the southwest of England and many other places too. If people want to get rid of the Conservative MP, they need to vote Liberal Democrat, and they can get that local champion that will stand up for them.
And let's hear from the relatively new leader of the Scottish National Party, John Swinney. Although, of course, he's been the leader of the Scottish National Party many years ago and has been around Scottish politics for a long time. So even though he's new, he's also old.
It's a welcome opportunity to remove the Tory government and to put Scotland first. And that's what I'll be saying to the public.
Now, and we'll hear from plenty of other politicians from other parties over the next couple of weeks. Well, I say couple of weeks, it's more than that. Alex, Laura had that tantalising tidbit about maybe there'll be an emergency finance bill to sneak in one last tax cut before Parliament is packed up on Friday. I mean, let's see. But we do know there is definitely some stuff that has to happen in Parliament the next few days.
Yeah, they call it the wash-up.
Another rain gag.
Hey, I didn't plan that one. Yeah, and I'm guessing, what day is it today? Wednesday.
Yeah.
So Thursday is probably going to be quite a busy parliamentary session because they're going to try and get everything through, because that's going to be the kind of wash-up day. And there's loads of bills kind of outstanding on the list. Things like the Renters Reform Bill, when you're talking about changing renters' rights, and the big question over whether or not that's going to get through. And Michael Gove has made various commitments about that in the past. I mean, there's stuff which happens to I'll be honest, quite a lot of the big stuff I think was tailing off anyway in the expectation that we're approaching election territory, but there's still some fairly active bits of legislation that they're going to have to plough through. Question mark, will they get it through on Thursday or not, before Parliament does what it's called prorogue on Friday, which is effectively
Friday
break up.
This week?
Next week.
Next week, okay, right.
Next week.
So there's just a few days to do this. There is something about, you mentioned it before, Friday is the energy cap announcement. We're expecting it to fall to something between £1,500 and £1,600 for a typical household, which is another cut. The one you mentioned you'd had your direct debit notice of. Our good friend, our actual good friend on this podcast, Steve Back at Political Picks, he did long lens snap the Energy Secretary, seemingly with a memo suggesting that there was going to be some sort of energy package around the cut in the energy price cap in addition to that. So watch out for that. Watch out for that. That wouldn't be inconsistent with an offer to the public ahead of a general election around their energy bills. And it went as far as saying that they were going to brief the big 6 energy companies and they wouldn't like everything that was there. So that's something to watch out for on Friday.
Friday is, just to correct myself, this Friday is when Parliament's going to prorogue.
Well, so they've only got tomorrow.
Yeah.
So they're not going to get anything through. So
it's going to be a very long day.
Thanks, you two, for keeping me company, especially as Chris Mason has stood me up.
To be fair, he's had a busy day.
Yeah, true. And also, I imagine he stood under a hand dryer right now because he's been in Downing Street for about 2 hours in the pouring
my
rain.
left sock is still wet. Just to share.
Alex, crowdfund a towel.
And one new shoe for Alex. Right, thanks, you two.
Thank you.
Thanks.